The stars outside were bright, burning cold pinpricks against the deep expanse of space. Inside the starship Redemption, Captain Elias Grant walked briskly through the corridors, his boots echoing off the metal floors. He had been in this war for so long it felt like a second home, but lately, something had felt different. The weight on his shoulders seemed heavier, his eyes more tired, and his thoughts wandered to a place he didn't want to visit. The intergalactic war with the Zorian Empire had torn apart the fabric of peace in the galaxy. Humanity's United Earth Defense Force had been stretched thin, fighting battles on countless fronts. As a captain, Elias had seen things he could never forget. Friends lost, enemies vanquished, planets burned. But nothing could prepare him for what he was about to encounter. "Captain Grant," a voice crackled through his comm. "We have a priority mission." Elias paused, glancing up at the digital screen on the wall. It flickered with the message, "Vekthari ship down, urgent repairs required." Queen Arathea alive, his heart skipped a beat. The Vekthari were a mysterious alien race, warriors who had fought against the Zorian Empire for centuries. They were known for their intelligence, honor, and incredible strength. But this wasn't about their fierce reputation. It was about something else entirely. The Vekthari Queen Arathea was a figure he had heard of only in whispers. The rumors spoke of her as a leader who could sway the course of the war with a single decision. If she was alive, it was a miracle. Elias walked quickly to the ship's engineering bay, his mind racing with questions. He had never met a Vekthari before, let alone one of their queens. His orders were clear: ensure her safety, provide immediate repairs, and report back to command. As he entered the bay, the sight before him left him momentarily speechless. The ship, the Vekthari vessel, was a magnificent piece of engineering, sleek and deadly, with designs Elias had never seen before. The smooth curves of its hull seemed to pulse with a life of their own, humming softly in the silence. But it was the figure standing at the center of the ship that caught his attention. She was tall, even by Vekthari standards, with an aura of strength and grace that was impossible to ignore. Her armor, dark and intricate, was dented and scratched from the battle she had just survived. Her sharp angular features were framed by silver hair, which shimmered faintly in the dim light. The eyes that met his were a deep, molten amber, eyes that held centuries of wisdom and power. Elias stood still for a moment, unsure of how to approach the situation. Here she was, the queen of the Vekthari, alive against all odds. The sight of her was almost overwhelming, and he knew that everything depended on his actions in the next few minutes. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. "Captain Elias Grant?" Her voice cut through the silence, clear and commanding. It was a voice that brooked no argument, yet there was an undercurrent of something else, something he couldn't quite place. "Yes, Your Majesty," he replied, his tone respectful but guarded. "I'm here to help." She studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing as if she could see through him. There was no fear in her eyes, only calculation. She stepped closer, the sound of her boots soft against the metal floor. "Are you the one who will repair my armor?" she asked, her eyes flicking to the damage on her chest plate. The metallic surface had been marred by a blast, and the energy shield that had once protected her was now flickering weakly. Elias nodded. "That's my task, Your Majesty." She seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded once as if making a decision. "Then I trust you will not fail." The words weren't a threat, but a statement. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. Despite her apparent fragility, she was injured after all. There was an undeniable strength in her presence. It was as if she had seen everything and still stood unbroken. He moved closer to begin his work. He didn't know much about alien technology, but the Vekthari were advanced, more advanced than humanity in many ways. He was going to need all his skill and training to get this right. As he started inspecting the armor, his thoughts raced. This was no ordinary repair job. This was about saving the life of someone who held the fate of their entire species in her hands. His fingers brushed against the metal plating as he carefully assessed the damage. But as he worked, something unexpected happened. He felt her presence behind him, so strong, so powerful that it was impossible to ignore. There was a quiet tension between them, a pull that neither of them seemed to want to acknowledge. As Elias reached to adjust a panel near her shoulder, his hand brushed against her arm. The contact was brief, but it sent an unexpected jolt through him. His heart skipped, and he quickly withdrew his hand, unsure of what had just happened. He glanced up at her, his face flushing slightly. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence stretched heavy with unspoken words, and then, as if breaking the silence intentionally, she spoke again. "Don't pretend that touch meant nothing." Elias blinked, taken aback. He had been trying to focus on the task at hand, but now his mind was distracted by her words. What did she mean? It wasn't as though he had intended to make any sort of advance. He had been simply fixing her armor. Yet her words lingered in his mind. I wasn't pretending anything," Elias said, his voice quieter than he intended. He cleared his throat and turned back to the armor, trying to regain his focus. "Let's get this repaired." But even as he spoke, he knew it was impossible to ignore the growing tension between them. Her presence was magnetic, and he found himself struggling to focus. She was the queen of an entire race, a leader in a war that had cost so many lives, and yet there was something about her that made him feel something more. Erethea's eyes followed his every movement, sharp and calculating. But there was a flicker of something softer there as well, something he hadn't expected. A moment of vulnerability? He couldn't be sure, but one thing was clear. His task was far from over. As he finished the repairs, he knew he had only scratched the surface of something much bigger. Something that would change everything. Days passed, and the repair work on Queen Erethea's armor was finally complete. Elias had worked tirelessly, using every bit of his expertise to ensure that the Vekthari queen was ready for whatever came next. The damage had been extensive, but she was now standing tall, her armor gleaming once more, and her energy shield fully restored. He had done his job, but there was still an unspoken weight between them, one that neither of them could ignore. Each day, they would cross paths again in the redemption. As they moved through the corridors of the ship, preparing for the next phase of their mission. Despite his growing fascination with Arethea, Elias tried to maintain his distance. He had a duty, a mission to complete, and getting involved with an alien queen was not part of the plan. But every time they spoke, there was a tension between them, a magnetic pull he couldn't resist. One evening, as the ship sailed through the cold, black expanse of space, Elias found himself once again standing beside Arethea in the command center. The war was escalating. The Zorian fleet had been relentless, and the Redemption had been called into action once again. The entire crew was on edge, their nerves raw from the constant battles, but Arethea remained calm. Her sharp eyes scanned the data flowing in front of her, her mind working quickly and decisively. Elias couldn't help but admire her composure. In the face of unimaginable pressure, she seemed unshaken, but there was something else. Something that lingered between them. The subtle glances, the brief touches when they passed each other, the moments where their eyes locked for just a second too long. It was as if they were both trying to understand something that neither of them could quite grasp. "Captain," Arethea said, her voice low and commanding, breaking his thoughts. "You've done well in repairing my armor. I owe you my life." She turned to him, her expression softening slightly. "You've proven yourself to be more than just a soldier. You're a man of integrity." Elias felt a rush of pride, but he quickly masked it with a professional demeanor. "I'm just doing my duty, Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady. Nothing more, but Arethea wasn't finished. She studied him for a moment, her amber eyes sharp as ever. "Duty." She repeated the word slowly, almost as if she was tasting it. "You know, I thought I understood what duty meant. But now, standing here with you, I wonder if there's more to it." Elias felt a twinge in his chest. What was she saying? He had been trying to maintain control, to keep his feelings at bay, but with every conversation, every interaction, it was getting harder to ignore the truth. There was something between them, something neither of them could deny. Before he could speak, Arethea stepped closer. "There is a different kind of strength I see in you," she said softly. "It's not just the strength of a warrior, but the strength of someone who can look beyond the battlefield. Someone who can see what others can't. It's rare in this galaxy." Elias was taken aback. He had never seen himself as special, just a man doing his job. But Arethea's words made him question everything. She saw something in him that he hadn't realized was there. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer, before she turned her attention back to the star maps in front of them. The moment passed, but the feeling didn't. It hung in the air between them like a fine thread, fragile but unbreakable. And as the redemption sailed through the night, Elias couldn't help but wonder what would happen if he allowed himself to follow that thread. The war continued to rage. The Zorian forces were relentless, their tactics brutal and unyielding. But through it all, Arethea remained a pillar of strength. She fought beside Elias and his crew, using her sharp mind and unmatched combat skills to turn the tide in humanity's favor. She wasn't just a queen, she was a warrior, and Elias couldn't help but be impressed by her every step of the way. One night, after a particularly grueling battle, Elias found himself alone in the ship's medbay. He was tired, the weight of the war pressing down on him, but he couldn't rest, not yet. He needed to check in on the crew to make sure everyone was recovering. As he moved down the hallway, he passed the command center, where Arethea was standing alone, looking out at the stars. Without thinking, he approached her. "Your Majesty," he called out softly. Arethea turned, her eyes meeting his. There was something different in her expression tonight, something softer. "Captain Grant," she said, her voice carrying a hint of exhaustion. "You should be resting." "I'm fine," he replied, though his words felt hollow. The truth was, he wasn't fine. He hadn't been fine for days. His thoughts were consumed with her strength, her beauty, and the way she made him feel. Arethea took a step closer to him. "The war is wearing us all down," she said quietly. "But I see something in you, something that gives me hope. You fight not just for survival, but for something greater, for a future." Elias wasn't sure how to respond. He had never thought of himself that way. He was just a soldier doing his job. But hearing Arethea's words made him reconsider everything he thought he knew about himself. For a long moment they stood there, the weight of their shared experiences hanging in the air. The battle raged on, but in that moment nothing else mattered. Finally, Arethea spoke again. "You know, Elias," she said softly, "there's more to this than just duty. There's a reason we're standing here together, a reason our paths have crossed." He nodded, his heart racing. "I don't know what the future holds, Your Majesty, but I know this: whatever happens, I'll fight for you. For us." For a brief moment, Arethea's eyes softened. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, something that made Elias's heart skip a beat. But before he could say anything else, she turned away, her posture straightening once more. The queen was back, the leader who had fought and bled for her people. But Elias knew something had changed between them. The connection they shared, whether it was duty, fate, or something more, was undeniable. And though the war wasn't over, and the future was uncertain, one thing was clear: they were bound together in a way neither of them could escape.